You ready? You recording? I'm going to kick go.
With our upcoming presidential election in the U.S., voting is how you can make a difference. Not only that, it's the only thing you should do to make a difference because of how big of a difference it makes. Out of the 150 million expected voters, your vote carries the leverage of 150 millionth of a difference. And your vote carries more weight than that because it doesn't actually carry any legal weight toward electing the president. The 538 members of the Electoral College are the ones whose votes legally elect the president, as described in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. So you vote to elect electoral voters who vote for and actually elect the president. And in most states, electoral voters aren't legally bound to vote according to the way that the voters vote for them to vote. This system is genius because who better knows who the citizens want to vote for than the Electoral College? Sure as hell not the citizens. You can't trust people like that. So at this point, your vote's like homeopathic medicine. It's so minuscule and irrelevant that it has more impact than if it counted toward electing the president. That's how homeopathy works. Just like in the 2000 presidential election when George W. Bush lost the popular vote to Al Gore, yet won the election. Those who cast losing votes for Bush turned out to have winning votes. That's how much their votes made a difference. I feel so sorry for archaic countries like Russia, who deprive their citizens of the opportunity to not be allowed to elect their president through popular vote. And it's easy to understand why using popular vote is a terrible system, because Russia uses it, and they're communists. We'd be just like them if we used the same system. And there's a lot of cold weather in Russia. Americans don't want that. Therefore, in the U.S., voting in the presidential election is your direct way of indirectly impacting the people who directly elect the president. And I think it's very clear. If people don't like this system, they just hate America.
Hello and welcome to the Functional Forum. We've got an unbelievable show tonight. Thanks so much everyone for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists, for Elite Forward in Medicine.
This is a great gathering.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
There's a lot of community happening tonight. I want to say welcome to all of the communities that are watching at home. This ecosystem that has been set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network that we are looking to develop, and it all revolves around you. There are meetups all over the country, all over the world.
We want to bring functional medicine to the masses.
We have 250,000 views, and you can see it's starting to uptick. Our vision at the Evolution of Medicine and the Functional Forum is to empower 100,000 practices based on two principles: root cause resolution and community health. There's an exponential potential to the future of medicine. This is an allopathic conversion machine that we have just created. And it has exponential potential because it can be seen by 1 billion people at no extra cost. That's the beauty of the internet.
Welcome to the Functional Forum, live from Miami, Florida. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Woo! Welcome, Miami. Thank you. Great to be here with all of you in Miami. Awesome to be here at the Functional Forum. Thanks so much for being with us. We've got an amazing jam-packed show for this evening. It's going to be really spectacular. So, if you were watching last time, you know that since we arrived here, I wrote a book. It's called The Evolution of Medicine, and it's #1 in a number of categories. And I know that there's a lot of people who are watching tonight who their first interaction with our organization was the book. This is our 32nd episode, so we've been doing this for about 3 years, and what you're going to get is the best of the world of functional medicine. And we're really taking time in these episodes recently to share with our community the potential of what we can do if we act like a community. Now, I know that this book has had an impact, but I knew even more when I went to Whole Foods recently and saw that the teal fish swimming the other way thing was definitely becoming a meme countrywide, even in Whole Foods for fish there. And if you haven't checked out the book, you can go to goevomed.com/book. You know, we launched our accelerator also this month, and it's really interesting to see. I think practitioners just get, and maybe I'm right, tell me if I'm right, but it seems like all the supplement companies, all the lab companies, all of the other conferences try and squeeze all of their conferences between the end of the Jewish holidays and Thanksgiving. So I think most practitioners have been in conferences for the last 5 weekends. And so some people miss the fact that we have our Practice Accelerator, which is really designed to help you build a much more streamlined practice. You know, the biggest thing that we found this year is that functional medicine practices are really inefficient. And so we decided on Thursday, we closed down the program. We had a few hundred doctors join us. And when we sent that email out to our community saying we were closing the program, we got so many people saying we didn't even know that there was a program. And so we're going to open it up this week. So go to goevomed.com/accelerator. We're going to open up till Friday. And if you're interested in building a technologically savvy practice, that's the place to go. So what's happening tomorrow? I might have tricked you at home by telling you that I was going to stand up here and tell you who to vote for, and I put that in the marketing material, and the truth is I'm actually not going to tell you which one of your favorite two parties to vote for, or even Gary or Jill Stein or any of that nonsense. What I am going to do tonight is to tell you that there is one vote that you can cast, not tomorrow, but every day for the next 4 years. And that vote is on our community, because you know what? Change is coming. You know, I have seen people who are very smart, people who love integrative medicine, fighting with each other on Facebook about the election. And yet, we're in a position where if we work together as a community, we can make the type of change that's not possible. You think the organic food revolution of the last 4 years or 8 years, did that happen because of who we put in office, or did it happen in spite of who we put in office? There is an opportunity for us to do that right now as a community, to take functional medicine forward, and it's going to be out of the realms of what's happening in the election. So I'm not going to tell you to vote for. I am going to encourage you to vote. We are in a swing state right here, so I can feel a little bit of tension in the room. But I know that, whatever happens, either if one of the two big parties win, I've looked at it and I really feel like in either case, the integrative medicine community, the micro-practice revolution, the taking functional medicine to the people can succeed in either and will succeed in either, and it's not going to happen as a result of who you vote for. It's going to happen what you vote with your dollars the whole rest of the time, and how you convince the whole rest of the community to vote with their dollars. So we've got work to do. This is a live show, so you can ask questions. If you're watching at home, you can watch on Twitter and just use hashtag Functional Forum for the questions. So we've got a lot of meetups watching tonight. We've got over 100 meetups in 8 countries, and it's really exciting to see the meetup growing. If this is the first time you've ever watched the forum, I would encourage you to go and be a part of a meetup or build a meetup, because what we're seeing is that those practitioners that are learning in community are learning quicker, are finding relationships with other practitioners, and are building these health centers of the future. Now, I say the word community a lot, and I'm not sure if we've agreed on what a definition of community is. And early in the first episode of this year, in Functional Neuropsychiatry, back in January, I made a book recommendation, which is The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible by Charles Eisenstein. And I put a quote by Charles in my book under Chapter 8, Building Your Community. And he says, "A community is a group of people bound together by gifts and stories." And so I would challenge anyone who's been to a meetup event, didn't feel like it was for them, maybe didn't show up to the next one. You know, it's going to take your gifts being given to that community. That's going to make the difference on whether these communities thrive, not how much you can take from it. And so I would challenge everyone to build a local community, be part of the local community, and give your gifts and tell your stories locally. And one great way to do that is the Future of Functional in 5. Tonight, here in Miami, we had about 12 awesome talks from the community here. And what we're challenging every meetup group to do next month on December the 5th is to host your holiday party and do a Future of Functional in 5. Allow people from your community to give their own 5-minute talk, contribute to the community, and really start to build something locally that will turn into value. Now, the one thing that you need to think about what you're going to give to that community is what is your gift. And so I just want you to think a little bit about what is the gift that you could offer to the local integrative or functional medicine community. What is the thing that you do that isn't like everyone else? What is the specialty that you've learned either through your own personal journey or through your work? And just take a little bit of time to think about what can I give to this local community, because in the medium term, the success of these meetup groups are going to depend on how much you give and not how much you get. So let me just think about what could we do if we had strong communities, because I don't want you to think that this is not something that's going to be valuable. This is going to be something that's going to be really valuable, but it's going to take some building at the beginning. So let me just talk about the things that we could do if we had strong communities. So how many people in here think it's ridiculous that if you're a physician doing, say, psychiatry, and you decide to add functional medicine to your practice, that your malpractice insurance goes up? Anyone thinks that's silly, right? You're doing fundamentally less invasive medicine. You're seeing fewer people every day, and yet it's going up. I think we could have a self-funded malpractice insurance amongst practitioners. But you know what it's going to take? It's going to take practitioners in their community opening up their books and saying, hey, I've been paying malpractice insurance for 10 years. I do functional medicine and I've never been sued. If people are willing to be vulnerable with that kind of information, I think we could create a self-funded malpractice insurance that would save people thousands of dollars a year. I think we could also get beneficial payment terms from payers. I hear a lot of people saying, why won't the payment insurance or Liberty Direct or otherwise pay for functional medicine? We're so much better. Can you prove it? Can you prove it with your outcomes? Are you tracking your outcomes? This is the kind of thing that needs to happen for us to prove that we're better so that payers will pay. And that's a responsibility on all of us. What a gift you could give to your community by just tracking your outcomes, and tracking your outcomes in a way that everyone else can use the data by using something like Living Matrix. That's a real gift that you could give to the whole community. And then part 3, the new reduced cost of new patient acquisition. Dr. Charlie Webb, who was mentioned earlier this evening, a friend of ours from Freedom Practice Coaching, who's a sponsor of the show, he once told me a story that he was invited to become a chiropractor in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he was invited to become there on this strip called Chiropractor Row. And he went there and he saw all these other great practices around. He goes, well, look at all the competition here. How am I going to build a practice? And he said, you're not thinking about it right. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, not 1% of the population use chiropractic, but 5%. And the reason is because all of these chiropractors doing great work together, marketing, building community, convinced there's a synergistic network effect from doing it. That's the potential of functional medicine. Why is it so difficult to convince everyone that we're doing so much great work? It gets fundamentally easier and easier the more we're all putting out into the community. And if you watch the previous forum, you know that 1 million people will go this year to the IFM website to look for a practitioner. So the momentum is building. But all of these meetups can help to build it even more quickly. So we got an amazing show tonight. I would just say that I'm aware of the fact that we haven't been as clinical this year in the second half of the year with the Functional Forum. And next year, we're going to go back to being super clinical. We're going to have the evolution of oncology and psychiatry and cardiology and neurology. But this second half of the year, we've taken some real time to show that this community is capable of doing something really tremendous. And we're going to finish off and we're going to end this tonight with some amazing speakers. So I'm really excited to announce the first speaker. I think that in order for this community to make the kind of impact that it needs to make on medicine, there's going to have to be a significant mindset shift for all of us. In the very first Functional Forum, I said we need to start acting like we're winning and stop acting like we're losing. That was the beginning. In order that for the next phase, we need to act at another level. So it's my great pleasure, and please give a warm Miami welcome. I've been waiting to play this track as my intro music for a long time. Welcome, JJ Virgin.
Miami, South Beach, bringing the heat, Can y'all feel that?
So what if the biggest thing you could do in your practice had nothing to do with nutrigenomics or lab testing or nutrition or supplements? What if there was something that had to go on top of all of that in order for you to make a difference with your patient? Want to know about it? Yes. You sure? So So I can't go back. So can you, there you go. All right. So that seems odd to say for being a nutritionist. And I've been very fortunate over the last decade doing PBS and being on Dr. Oz and being on TLC. But along the way, you know, people see that outward facing and they go, oh my gosh, that's been so great. But they didn't see the struggle. Anyone here struggled as you've gone through your career? Like you see a little bit, you see that, and you see the shows, but what you don't know is that I was on Dr. Phil for 2 years, and when I was on Dr. Phil for 2 years, I got a primetime show on ABC. I was the star, called You Are What You Eat. Anyone hear of that? Yes. It never aired. It aired in other countries, but not here. Then I wrote these books. Now, before these books, these are 4. Before these, I wrote a book called The Art of Losing It. You never heard of that because I got in a fight with the person that I wrote it with. And I didn't realize he wanted to self-publish, I wanted to publish. I didn't realize that what I'd signed with him, the agreement I'd signed with him, gave him 50% of everything that I was going to do for the rest of my life. Right? That's when I got an attorney that I keep now with me all the time. Then my next book I sold was called 6 Weeks to Sleeveless and Sexy. Anyone hear of that? There's always one. There's always one. Thank you for buying that book. You were the one of 1,000. So there was that. And there were a lot of other struggles along the way. But I always thought that if I had these guys, you know, if everything was cool with my kids, that I could handle it. This is my big guy, Grant, and my little guy, Bryce. And there was a lot of stuff going on there, too. My big guy, Grant, got diagnosed with bipolar. Right at the same time he got diagnosed with bipolar, my dad got diagnosed with cancer, and my marriage blew up. It was super, like, the worst struggles ever. But again, I thought, all right, you know, financially things were rocky, divorce going on. Actually, divorced my husband because he wasn't contributing financially, and then I got sued for alimony. Right? I know. Just, right? Yeah. So this is all going on, but I keep thinking, you know, I can handle all of this as long as everything is fine with my kids. I'm good. Any parents in the room? Yeah? So, right? I mean, like, you know, things blow up, but as long as your kids are okay, we're cool. So I met this amazing agent. It was one of the cool things that happened from when I was on TLC's Freaky Eaters. Did anyone see that show? See, this is why these shows get canceled, people. Not helpful. I actually prayed for that show to get canceled because I was stuck in all sorts of weird parts of the country dealing with people who like to eat tartar sauce as their soul food, and it was a tough thing. But one thing I did get from that show was I got an amazing book agent and someone who finally believed in me and saw my vision and took what I was doing, which I was like obsessed with weight loss resistance. I was going around the country teaching these courses to doctors on weight loss resistance, and I wanted to write the book on that. And she goes, no, you need to do that food intolerance thing. And I go, really? That's like so obvious. You know, it's usually that thing that you're doing that makes you unique and special. Right under here, it's right here. That's the thing you got to take out to the world. And you often can't see it. That's where a coach really helps. But she got me this amazing deal to do the virgin diet. And I knew that this was going to take it out to the world. So I invested my entire advance into it. And then I borrowed too. Money I didn't have. I was all lined up for this thing to be amazing. And I remember I got home. I'd been preparing. I did a PBS show on it. I'd been preparing all day for that PBS show. And I came home. And I walk in the door, and my then older guy, who was 16 at the time, was in a bad mood. He'd gone from school, left school early because he'd had a migraine, but now he'd miraculously recovered, and he wanted to go to martial arts, right? But I had a rule, like if you could not stay in school, you didn't get to do the fun stuff, right? Well, he got madder and madder, stomping around, throwing things, and finally he looked at me, and he goes, Mom, I'm not as strong as you think I am, and he stormed out of the door. My younger son, who was then 15, walks out and he goes, God, what a jerk. I'm like, right? So I go back into the garage. I start verse training. And the next thing I know, about 20 minutes later, my younger son runs in And he said, Mom, come quick. Grant's been hit by a car, and he's been airlifted to the local hospital. Now, you know airlift is a bad thing. And the next time I saw Grant, this is what I saw. This actually is the cleaned up picture of Grant. When I saw Grant, he had bones sticking through his legs. He was covered in road rash. He literally had glass sticking out that I would pick out for months afterwards. He was in a deep coma, and the doctor came to talk to us and told us that he had a torn aorta, kills 90% of the people on the scene. He had multiple brain bleeds. He had diffuse axonal injuries, and he was in a deep coma, completely non-responsive. And he had 13 fractures, including a crushed heel, and both femurs were broken, and his tibia was sticking out of his skin. And he said, you know, with these injuries, we can't fix him here because we have to use a blood thinner, and if we were to give him a blood thinner to fix his aorta, his brain will bleed out. So basically, you can have his brain or you can have his aorta, but you can't have both. So my ex-husband asked him, what would you do if this was your kid? A great question to ask. And the doctor said, well, there is a doctor who could do this surgery, but he'll never survive the airlift. And even if he survives the airlift, he's not going to survive the surgery. And even if he survives that surgery, the chance that he's going to be anywhere near normal, he's going to be so brain damaged, it wouldn't be worth it. And my younger son, then 15, looks at him and says, so like what, a 0.25% chance? And the doctor says, yep, that's about right, son. And Bryce looked at him and he said, we'll take those odds. Smart kid. So we take him to the next hospital. I literally drive there at 2 a.m., not knowing if I'm going there to pick up a body. Get there, and it's just full court press, game on at this hospital. They are ready. They have 5 surgical teams in there. The doctor walks in, he goes, are you the mom? And I go, yes. He goes, I got this. I do this all the time. I had someone thrown off the overpass last week and I fixed them. Don't worry about it, go upstairs, I'll come get you when I'm done. I'm like, all right. I went upstairs, I wrote a blog post, he comes up, he goes, okay, I'm done. He's fine. Now, as far as his brain, I'm just the plumber. I have no idea if he'll ever wake up. So I go up there, and he is in a deep coma, but he's alive. And I'm in there with him in a deep coma in the ICU. And I've got this book coming out in a matter of weeks that I've got everything invested in. And I've got my son in a coma. And I know the number 3 leading cause of death, and I'm not going to leave him in the hospital. But I also know that I'm the sole financial support for my family, and I have everything plus invested in this book, and then I'm going to have to pay for all of this. So I've got to do both. And I don't have a choice. And I look back at this. You know, I went through 4.5 months with him in the hospital. The book became a New York Times bestseller. The PBS show became a big hit. He comes out of the hospital, and people are like, how the heck did you do that? And I was completely on autopilot during the time. I just was focused. I knew I got super essential. Number 1 was my self-care, because I knew I couldn't go into the ICU if I was sick. So I was extreme self-care. And then number 2, I was either there for my son, doing what I needed to do for him, or I was there for the book, and that was it. That's all I did. And I looked back after 4.5 months, which was just the journey, because he's coming out of now a traumatic brain injury. People were saying, how did you do that? What, are you Superwoman? How did you do that? And I realized that all of those things that I've gone through in my life, which we all have, we've all had those struggles, were actually the biggest blessing in disguise, because they were what prepared me for that. This is a study that showed that people who've gone through adversity, not extreme adversity, but not no adversity. They've gone through adversity in their life, are happier, they're more successful, and they're able to handle stuff. So I looked at all of this and I realized that basically I'd been in training for this, but more importantly, that we can train for this, that this can be taught, that mindset is a muscle and you can develop it. And you don't necessarily need to go through, bless you, what I went through to do this, right? You can actually learn it through lessons so that you can handle more. Because if you up-level your mindset, if you have that growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset, you can accomplish so much more in life. So the first thing I did as I started to test that was I realized, well, what we measure, we can improve. The challenge with mindset is it's so subjective. I'm going to need to make this objective, and I'm going to take this down and break it into traits so that we can look at each of these. These traits all together become the miracle mindset, and that you can quantify them so that you can then see where you are and where you need to be at your best. So these are forgiveness, abundance-minded, resilience, action-taking, living in the present, collaborative, and courageous. And the first one is don't wish it was easier, make yourself stronger. And I'll tell you, Grant now, it's been 4.5 years, and he's coming out of still a traumatic brain injury. And what's interesting is when he first started coming out of this, we actually were in Miami for a vacation. We're actually down in Key West for a vacation. And he went to go walk down. I was staying in one place and the rest of the family was staying in another. He wanted to walk over to the other place. And I had to check myself because I didn't want him to walk over there by himself. Like at first when he came home, I wasn't letting him walk anywhere by himself, which was making him worse. He was getting more depressed. And so I was going to walk him over to the other house. And we start walking down the street and there is a car like way down there, and he takes a step out and I jumped him. Because I was like, I had such PTSD about this, and I had to check myself on there, and he was sitting there going, Mom, I have to do this myself. I have to do this myself. And I really took that in because I had a great coach early on who said to me, don't wish it was easier, make yourself stronger. And now when he says, okay, I can't remember these things, his challenges with his memory, can you just let me know when I have those appointments? I go, no, I can't. You have to do this. I'm not doing this for you. You have to step up. You can do this, but you have to get strong. Whenever he gets depressed and he doesn't know what his purpose is, I go, honey, this is not going to be easy. But you have a huge purpose in the world, but it's up to you. You have to make yourself stronger. And I believe we are never better than when we're challenged. And that's how we build that resilience muscle. When he was in the hospital, he had this crushed heel injury. And it was interesting because at first, I took things one step at a time. First, he had the torn aorta, we had to fix that. Then he had the brain injury, we were looking at working him out of that coma. Then he comes out of the coma, and now I'm trying to wake up his senses. And honestly, all of the orthopedic injuries seemed like the least of my worries until we started getting through some of those things, and I noticed he had this crushed heel that had a pin sticking out of it and a big open wound and the cast leaving that open. And the orthopedic surgeons came in one day and they said, we're just trying to make him able to walk again. Now, the first thing I did was take them out of the room because I managed every bit of talk around him. But I took him out of the room and I said, he's an athlete. What would you do if Kobe Bryant were in that bed? You wouldn't be trying to help him walk again. So I want you to treat him the way that you would treat Kobe. And it was interesting because I made a decision early on that he was going to be 110%. Not that he was going to wake up, not that he was going to maybe be able to walk again, but that he was going to be 110%, that this was going to be the best thing that ever happened to him, to me, to our family, and for that matter, as many people whose lives I could touch with the story. Think about how they treated us in the hospital with that attitude versus if I'd just been, oh, okay, hopefully you can just walk again. It was an entirely different situation. I love this quote. It's such a courageous quote. And I think about this, if you want to take the island, burn all the boats, because when this all happened, I reached out on Facebook and I reached out to my email list and I said, listen, I don't want your sympathy, I need your support. Any ideas you have, anything that you can do to help here, send it on in. And this one woman wrote, she goes, honey, don't worry about your job. It will be there waiting for you. You just stay in that hospital and take care of your sweet boy. And I'm thinking, I don't have a job. I run a company, and I have a whole lot of people whose lives depend on me having that company, who work for me, whose families depend on me. This is not an option. Moreover, if I fail at this right now, you don't get multiple times with New York publishers. I'd already had one failed book. I don't get a second failed book and ever get another shot at this. And I had a PBS show. So I would be completely bankrupt looking at a son who, traumatic brain injury, the traditional hospitals and traditional medical community tells you it takes a tincture of time. They literally told me, now we wait, that there was nothing I can do. I was behind their backs giving them fish oil. I brought all sorts of stuff into the hospital when I knew they weren't going to listen. And I brought all the research, but they weren't buying it. So there was no option. I wonder what would happen if, when you're deciding what you want to do with your practice or that book you want to get out of there, if there was no option, if success was not optional, if you just had to do it. Because so often I hear from people, and I guess because I come from the weight loss world, when they say, oh, I'll try that. Well, in weight loss, when they tell me they're going to try the diet, you know what that means? They're going to go have a cookie as soon as they leave, right? There's no trying. Trying does not mean doing. Do not try, just do. Now, when Grant started to come out of the coma, the first thing he did was wake up. I'd never been around someone coming out of a coma. I'm sure someone in this room has, right? But I'd only seen the movies, so I thought he was going to wake up, smile at me, say, I love you, Mom. Nope, that was not what happened at all. He woke up and stared off into space and moved his arm like this. And I thought, oh my gosh, is this it? And I kept holding on to the 110%, and I started working on every type of thing that I could do to wake up all of his senses. I did sound, I did smell, I did touch, I did taste, I did temperature, and I would track every little thing. Because I'd had challenges prior to this of being in the present. But you're in the present when you're watching for these little things, and every little thing added up. I knew we'd get to 110%, not from going from 0 to 110%, but from going 1% to the next 1% to the next 1%. And I think back of Grant and Bryce together. They were in this room. Grant's in bed. Bryce was standing by him. And we were trying to get Grant to follow simple commands. And Bryce said, Grant, lift your arm. And Grant went like this. And this was the only arm he had free. Like everything else was in casts. And Bryce asked him to do it again, and it got up a little higher. And this went on for, 5-10 minutes. And it kept getting up a little higher until finally Bryce could sneak under enough to get Grant's arm on his shoulder. And both of them, it was just such a great moment. You could tell that Grant was so proud. And I think also pushing him further than he was ready to go helped all along the way as well. Because I noticed in the hospital, they kept going, oh, let's not do too much. But we just kept going a little bit more. And every little bit took him a little further out. It's like expanding your comfort zone. Now, I have a summit I do each year called the Mindshare Summit, and the whole philosophy of that is the rising tide lifts all boats. And one of the things that I've built my whole life around is collaborating. Just like James said, if a town buys into something, like there's always room for another great person. I'm in the weight loss world, and my top people that I work with, that I collaborate the best with, are people you would think would be my competition. When we're all sending out emails for each other, the best people for me to email for and email back are Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Sarah Gottfried, people who have very similar philosophies, because people aren't buying one weight loss book. They're not watching one video. They're not doing one program. So when you look at this, we all lift each other up. When this started to happen, I put the whole thing out in my Facebook community, and one woman actually kind of blasted me for doing it. But I knew two things. Number one, I was going to get a lot more help if I was very vocal about what was going on. But number two, I was going to be able to help a lot more people by doing that. Because I was getting all sorts of amazing information that most people would never get. I had Dr. Daniel Amen coming to the hospital to help us. So I knew that I had resources that most people wouldn't have. And we were able to have all the research behind doing high-dose fish oil, which we started doing at the first hospital, again, behind their backs, because they wouldn't go over 2 grams, because they were afraid of bleed outs. And we did all sorts of other things, which I've categorized all in an ebook to give people, but we give that away every single week because people know the story and they come to us for the information. Now, along the way, we sort of jumped ship from when, we would do things in advance of when the doctors really wanted us to do some of them. But it all came from the very first surgeon that we found. And what happened that first night when we were at the very first hospital and they wanted us to leave him there, he was going to die in the next 24 hours, is they had to find a doctor who would accept the case. And there was only one doctor who did this surgery in Southern California, and only really one option. And the doctor who took the case on First of all, we had to track him down. It was midnight. Then he had to take the case. Then he had to assemble the other surgical teams, the orthopedic team, the neurosurgeon team, the critical care team. But then he had to find the stent that he wanted to use. And it turns out that the stent was part of a clinical trial that had ended 2 weeks prior. And so it wasn't around anywhere. So he had to find one of those. That had to get flown in. And then he had to put it into Grant, who was 16, but it was only approved for adults. And he just said, you know what? I figured I'd ask for forgiveness. I can fix him if he's alive. I can't fix it if he's dead. And speaking of asking for forgiveness, as I went through all of this, I still remember where I was when I got the call about the virgin diet, hitting the New York Times list. And then after that, I did 3 more books. And I would get these calls, and I would do the shows, and I just was on autopilot with everything, where I would do something, hit a goal, and I just started chasing the next goal. And nothing was giving me any type of joy. And I thought that, Grant was the victim of a hit and run. And this woman hit him, got out of the car, looked over, saw him, gasped, got back in the car, and left. And people during the whole time that we knew this kept saying, well, what are you going to do about that lady? And I go, she's got her own issues. I have no idea. Maybe he walked in front of the car. I don't know. I just thought I'd let it go. But I went through a workshop where you do forgiveness training. And I realized as I was doing this, because it was the reason I was no longer able to feel joy, that not only did I have to forgive her, I needed to forgive my son, I needed to forgive myself. But the forgiveness was really what allowed me to start to feel the joy again and start to work through this PTSD that I've had from this. So here's the latest of Grant. This is Grant's artwork. He was never creative prior to this accident. He was a very typical teenager. He's now very sweet, empathetic, very into gardening and art. It's not always pretty. He's got a brain injury. There are some good days and there's some bad days, but there's way more good than bad. And in some ways in his life, he's 110%. And some he's not, but we're still working on it. And as long as he's alive, I've got places to go with him and ways to work on him. It's all part of the next book coming out, The Miracle Mindset, and the documentary that comes with it, You Are Stronger Than You Think. That'll be on public television. And I just want to leave you with this one thought. Because it comes up all the time with Grant. He gets frustrated, he struggles. And my biggest line to him is, Grant, you're stronger than you think. You can do it. And I want you just to think, what would you be able to accomplish? What would you be able to do if you were stronger than you think? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great start to what we wanted to talk about here tonight. And I hear from so many practitioners who it just took a little bit of confidence for them to go and start their own micro practice or build the practice. And if that's all it is, then then it's the mindset that we need to work on if we're going to make significant change. So keep the questions coming in. # Functional Forum on Twitter. JG will be back on the panel at the end of the show with some of the other presenters. On the show, this has sort of been the evolution of the Functional Forum. Is the goal at the beginning, once we established that the goal was to set up 100,000 micro practices or to stimulate the creation of those micro practices, it became a lot easier for us to work out who should be sponsors of the show. You've got to have a technology or a program that helps the delivery of that. So we've been very fortunate to have Igbo. Igbo is the Uber for phlebotomists. It makes that you can outsource the phlebotomy. They have a functional medicine panel now, and they're available in Miami and in basically anywhere that has an NFL team, an NBA team, or ice hockey team. So I think you guys have all of those. So you definitely got it here in Miami. But to be able to outsource the most annoying part of running labs in a practice is really, really valuable for your own mental state, if nothing else. Full script, same kind of thing for supplements, to be able to, still use all the same high quality professional brands that you love, but to be able to prescribe supplements. This is definitely the way things are going as medicine and integrated medicine come together. Freedom Practice Coaching, I mentioned Dr. Webb before, but we're very blessed to have them as a sponsor all the way through. And some of the ideas that they came up with for how to build these practices that are building community. What's the difference between marketing your practice and building community? It's the same basic thing in that you introduce people to stories and gifts about your practice, but the thing about building communities, you want to introduce those people to each other. Dr. Terry Walls, when she spoke on the September Functional Forum, said even if she had unlimited resources, she would still do her work in a group because of the power of the peer-to-peer community support. And so, we're really excited that Freedom Practice Coaching is innovating in this area. And then HeartMath, one of the things with the accelerator, which is our last sponsor, is how do you operationalize these technologies? And HeartMath is a technology that really allows you to get cohesions mentally, and what we've seen is that for patients, if you're getting them on a starting step towards being truly in control of themselves, and starting with their emotions is a great starting point for doing that. And as I mentioned earlier, the accelerator is open for the rest of this week. We'll open it again in 2017. But what we're creating online right now is a hive mind of doctors that are all about how to make it easy for the next 100,000 doctors and the next 1,000,000 doctors worldwide to build functional medicine practices, because it's a fundamental redesign of medicine when the patient is the most important person in the medical relationship and not the doctor. And so we need new practices to reflect that. So we're going to get on to our next speaker now. The reason why we're here at the Turnberry Isle Resort is because this is a new center for innovation in medicine. And my next guest I met at a conference that we did earlier on this summer. And I wanted someone to really share with our community that, earlier this year, we did a conference in Germany. It was the August Functional Forum, and we had the WHO there. And they pretty much said they don't really know what's going on with non-communicable disease. They don't really have a plan. And yet, here we are in America where the functional medicine community is delivering better outcomes at lower costs for non-communicable disease. And so I wanted to find someone in our ecosystem that could speak the doctor language, that understood this and had been a physician, but also knew what was going on in industry and also knew how powerful it would be if we had a solution where we could get better outcomes at lower costs. So his practice, Resilia Health, is right in this complex. And please give a warm welcome for local favorite, Dr. Craig Tanio.
Thank you very much. JJ, what an inspiring talk. My expertise is in building new business models, healthcare economics, and change. And really, no great change can happen unless you have that mindset of abundance and seek the art of the possible. I have a challenge here because with a clinical audience, I'm going to try to make healthcare economics interesting. And I think it's highly relevant because really for two audiences, your patients and clients, it affects them every day. And it affects you as practitioners on how you can actually run and build a practice. Let's see, there. My thesis is very simple. If we believe that an integrative and functional approach can successfully address the root causes of chronic disease, then there are enormous economic opportunities today that we can successfully expand this model. The first part, if you've been attending these, has been discussed in many different ways. So I'm going to really unpack the second part by getting into some of the root causes of why chronic disease is contributing to most of the costs of healthcare. In Davos this year, Dr. Francis Collins, the director of the NIH, said that healthcare only drives 20% of health outcomes. To this room, that's a pretty obvious statement, but it's very interesting that in both the basic science and the health policy community, it's really becoming an underlying accepted fact that you have to understand what's happening with the exposome, how it's affecting genetic expression, how behaviors are doing this, and the socioeconomic impact. What is not clear is when you look at the different clinical and business models out there today, you have to ask yourself how many of the clinical models that are out there are actually dealing with these other root causes of health. So if we take an economic look, let's look at what the U.S. consumer is spending today. This is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics from last year. And it breaks down spending, and it provides, I think, some very interesting ways on how to think about the root causes of healthcare costs. The biggest spend is on housing, so $18,000 a year. Getting clean air, water, environment is critical. Healthcare spending has now become the second largest item, so $9,000 spent per every man, woman, and child in this country. And over half of the spending is completely invisible to the customer. It's been spent by employers or the government. You can see the consumer health insurance spent once a year. That's what's coming out of pocket that the consumer can see. And the amount that's actually spent out of pocket directly on healthcare is the smallest amount, but it's the most sensitive because the consumer feels there's all this other money that's being spent. Food is obviously a critical input into health, and education affects healthcare decisions. So about 85% of what the consumer spends a year is actually affecting their health outcomes, not just healthcare. This is a pretty complex chart. It's from the Upshot in the New York Times, but it says some very important messages around economics and this country over the last 25 years. The graph shows change in income for each percentile of a household, and you run from households from the lowest 1 percentile to the 99th percentile. The top graph shows what income changes did in the 90s. And pretty much everybody got a lift in income. The concentration in the top 5% and 1% can be seen. But between 2000 and 2014, no income bracket actually got higher income. And what that nets out is over a 25-year period, most of the country has not received a higher income. And if you wonder what's fueling some of the election, that's clearly a picture of what's going on. Now add on to that what's happening with healthcare costs, which is usually going up by 1.5% to 2% of the GDP growth. Rand calculated for the decade of 2000 that if healthcare had just been managed at inflation, every family would have had an extra $5,000 in their pocket. And that would have lifted them up to a positive income. So healthcare is robbing our citizens of a higher income and of a middle-class existence. And my good colleague, Dave Chase, is putting together a movie on this. If you want to follow him at the Big Heist, it's very interesting. He's trying to communicate through film about this whole issue. But it's come to such a limit now that these forces of healthcare economics need to be addressed. So if you look at this graph, this shows what's happened the last 7 years. When we had the Great Recession, households needed to squeeze. So this chart on the left shows that every single item, food at home, housing, transportation, food away from home, clothing, all got squeezed. The only thing that went up was the cost of healthcare. And most of that was in deductibles or in co-insurance. Co-payments went down. So households that are squeezing their budgets, the only piece that's going the reverse direction is healthcare costs. And now if you look at this on a global basis and you ask the question, is healthcare costs getting us better outcomes? This is oftentimes people show the Commonwealth Fund data, but I'm a data geek, admittedly. And Chris Murray, who was the co-author with Julio Frank, the head of health in Mexico in 2000, the initial WHO report, has basically assembled, with the gift of $100 million from Gates Foundation, now the planet's largest database on health. And so you can go to healthdata.org and see all of this. But what this graph shows is actually that if you look at health outcomes, he's consolidated the health span into a single metric called disability adjusted life years. And it basically, as countries get richer, usually they have better health outcomes. Now in this graph, red is bad, it's lower than expected, and blue is better. So Spain and Portugal have better health outcomes. Russia has worse health outcomes compared to their income. And you can see in the U.S., the U.S. really is an outlier on the downside of health outcomes. As you kind of click into this data, you can now see the picture of the overall burden of disease, and you can see that the vast majority of disease burden in this country today is chronic disease. And now when you actually break down the total cost spending, chronic disease represents 86% of total cost spending, spending that you have a solution to. If you break it down from Medicare, which is a part of the payers that I've been working in depth, you can see that the spending increases as the number of conditions go up. So the average spend in Medicare per patient a year is about $9,600. So if you have 0 to 1 conditions, it goes to $2,000 spend a year. 6+ conditions is $32,000 a year. Now this chart is very interesting. It shows on the left-hand side the percentage of the Medicare population and then the percentage of total spending. And then the top two colors, the orange and the yellow, show if you have 6 conditions or 4 to 5 conditions. Basically patients with 3 chronic conditions constitute 74% of Medicare spend. And so that's a small part of the population, but by far generating the highest costs. And that population is pretty consistent year over year in that higher cost spend. So my career has actually been spent, in the intersection of medicine and business and policy. I did my training at the University of Pennsylvania, where there was a community of physicians who were very interested in being impact agents. And when I got out of residency, I tried to think, what was the way that I could have the biggest impact and take the biggest challenge on. And so I went to Baltimore and basically worked in a set of federally qualified community health centers in West Baltimore, same kind of neighborhood if you watch The Wire, and worked there for 5 or 6 years. Both seeing patients, but also really doing the business side of operations and finance. And one of the things that I learned in that time with the community health centers is the importance of partnership and collaboration. We got all of the community health centers in Maryland together. We basically got together with Johns Hopkins that was forming a Medicaid health plan, and basically we brought them the patients for the health plan in exchange for equity. 20 years later, I'm on the board of Baltimore Medical System. The equity that the individual community health centers had paid for more uninsured care than the grants that they were getting from the federal government. So really, because the health plan Priority Partners basically is the #1 Medicaid plan now in the state of Maryland. So it taught me that you could really get the business side to work well for very needy sets of the populations. I then spent about a decade at McKinsey & Company, working with some of the largest institutions, both in the U.S. and in the globe, around healthcare, value issues. So for example, with the state of Tennessee, we spent a year with Governor Bredesen in the mid-2000s, where they faced an issue where Medicaid had constituted such a high percentage of the state budget that 90 cents of every new tax dollar was going to health care and was being taken away from education, from roads, from other infrastructure. And they just had to solve that issue. And so the cost issue is really paramount in this country. And I would tell you that stakeholders are really looking for the right answers, answers that you have today at your fingertips. I also think that on the clinician side, you're looking for the right economic answers too. One is, how do we get our patients and communities to make the right investment in health? Either all that non-healthcare spending to get aligned in the right way. And then importantly, from your practice side, how do you get more resources into your practice so that we can deliver integrative care with the right approach and the right time with patients? So I'll tell you what is not the right answer, and it's just throwing more administrators and management into this. This is a pretty interesting graph that shows that over a 50-year period, you can see the growth of clinicians, which is that red box, and then the yellow is the growth of administrators, which has increased by 3,000% over a 50-year period. And many of these large institutions want to solve this, but they don't know how to solve it. And I believe that the answer really is going to be at the front line, looking at how we as clinicians work with both our patients and the immediate community. And some of the interesting examples, can be seen now in some other best practices. So the picture on the right-hand side is a company called Buurtzorg. They're a group of community nurses in the Netherlands that was founded about 10 years ago. Long story short, they have a model of self-managed teams. They grew from nothing to where they now have 15,000 clinicians, not only in the Netherlands, but in about 30 other countries. And the amount of administrators that they have for 15,000 clinicians is less than 40 people. Because they trust professional integrity, professional judgment, and it really is the modern way of managing professionals at the front line. So what healthcare budget would you rather manage as a clinician? The left-hand side shows the typical fee-for-service spend in primary care for a 65-year-old in Medicare. You could bump it up to $125 a month if you had a direct primary care practice, or if you actually agreed as a physician to try to manage the total Medicare budget, you would have $1,000 a month. So it's an interesting choice. There are, in the last 7 or 8 years, a number of companies that on the traditional side, more conventional side of primary care, have been looking to develop a scalable model that tries to go on the right-hand side of the budget. So a company like Oak Street Health specializes in Medicare Advantage. Landmark takes house calls programs to the sick. Company that I was chief medical officer for, a company called GenCare, took a joint venture with Humana, and we basically scaled it from 0 to 26 centers in 6 states, 18,000 patients in 4 years. And we got that model to work quite well. Just a couple things around Medicare Advantage is now people don't realize that 31% of Medicare beneficiaries have now gone to this program, which is managed by the health insurance companies. The payers take 15% for administration and profit, but importantly that Medicare Advantage actually pays for sicker patients, they pay more money. And that's actually been a breakthrough in technology because in the 90s, there was this competition to attract healthy patients. The risk adjustment is now, that I can tell you as a practicing physician in there, that you get paid enough to take care of the sickest patients. And so many payers are now paying physician groups the entire medical budget. The clinical and economic opportunity has been pretty simple in these models. It's dramatically increased the investment upfront in frontline care, primary care, health coaching, home-based care. There's not been a company yet that has scaled out a functional approach to this, but I think the opportunity is there. We can take a 21st century delivery model of taking technology, professional development, and a redesigned care model, and then we can achieve the quadruple aim. We can lower costs by basically the lower downstream costs, pay for the higher upstream costs. We can get tremendous patient satisfaction, clinician joy, and quality. just to give a sense of the upstream and the downstream economics. This is data from Oregon where the legislature made the payers sort of lay out how much was being spent on primary care. And the average was about 5%. It ranged from 3 to 13%. But if you take the average, you could triple the amount that is spent on primary care if you could reduce the overall cost of care by 10%. Let me give you the results that I was able to achieve with GenCare over the past few years. And this is data that Humana shared with the Georgia legislature of the JV, but it basically is an indexed graph of total clinical costs, everything all in for the entire joint venture. And we had a 40% decrease in admission days. Total cost basically for that budget went down by about $2,000 per person, which per year, which more than paid for the higher investment in primary care. So really, 4 takeaways. Chronic disease drives most healthcare costs, and in particular, patients with multiple chronic disease are driving the costs. I didn't spend a lot of time on this because of the time, but it's really important to know that secondary prevention at this point is a more implementable clinical business model than primary prevention. Risk adjustment does work, so in value-based and capitated models, clinicians have the potential to get paid more for sicker patients, and that there are models right now that are out there that are scaling across the country that have been able to get this to work. So in conclusion, if we believe that an integrative and functional approach can work to address the root cause of chronic disease, there really are enormous economic opportunities to expand our model in the next decade to come. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig. Appreciate it. Look, I think it's really, really important that everyone in our community gets to speak this language, because if you listen to what Craig was saying there, and you can really hear it, is that we can go upstream, solve these chronic diseases at primary care, and make real impact to the healthcare system. And if you're a physician that can deliver better outcomes at lower cost, if your practice can deliver outcomes at lower cost, there's going to be lots more opportunities for you to partner with all kinds of people. That's why tracking outcomes and that kind of work is super important. So I wanted to make sure that we had something that was super relevant to the practicing community in Miami area. And obviously one of the big clinical things that's happening this year is the Zika virus, dreaded Zika virus. I didn't see many people wearing their safety gear on the way in. What were you thinking? So coming up next to share a case study with all of us is someone that I think really is playing an important role in what we see as the future of non-communicable disease again, which is nurse coaching. And we're very excited to see the synergy between physician and health coaching. And I think that nurses are in a great position to be able to provide that kind of value to the system. So please, a warm welcome to Susan Luck.
Since we're a national audience, maybe international, I thought that it would be important to bring our story, our new emerging story that's occurring here in South Florida, to give an idea of some of the challenges that we're faced with as a community. And when I say community, it's the citizens, it's us as practitioners and functional health practitioners trying to grapple with what we're seeing or what we're anticipating is emerging in terms of the Zika epidemic. This is the mosquito, Aedes aegypti, and actually a beautiful mandala, that's the virus. This is not political, even though we're on the eve of the election. The blue represents the states that have now had Zika come into their communities. And so this really is, we are the microcosm, but it's really becoming part of the larger pandemic that we're seeing. And unfortunately, due to environmental changes and other things, we will probably be seeing this emerge again. Right now, we're moving into the dormant season, so we're not wearing our gear. And it's important that we think about our prevention. These are the cases that have been reported in the United States. The darker blue indicates higher case reporting, and that was as of October. We all know the symptoms, just for those that want to review: joint pain, conjunctivitis, rash, and fever. Case study, just as an idea of a woman who is healthy, who's thinking about having a family, who has children, who lives in Miami at the epicenter of the outbreak, and is fearful about not getting bitten by a mosquito. We've heard about the risks in pregnancy. We're not going to discuss that this evening. There's the CDC and other websites that one could go to for that information. But I think the important piece is, what do we do to protect ourselves in the healthiest way possible? And also, as practitioners, what do we advise the clients and patients that we're working with? Because we have a challenge, and it's a dilemma. On one hand, we don't want anyone to get the Zika virus, whether it be a child, an elderly person, or a woman who is pregnant or going to get pregnant. And on the other hand, we don't want to expose ourselves or others to the environmental chemicals that we hear so much about, that especially in functional medicine, we're very concerned about the toxic body burden and what that could mean in long-term health and also in the short term. So this is classic of our younger population in Miami Beach, in the neighborhoods where Zika has been found, and there's great concern. This is the CDC guidelines, basic, obvious, wear protective clothing, stay in air conditioning in the summer, and use clothing that's been treated with chemicals, and that's okay, but not to get it on your skin. Kind of seems hard to wear the clothing without it touching your skin. Sleep under mosquito netting. I don't know anyone personally who has been able to do that. And use repellents. And the CDC says that these insect repellents are safe and effective for pregnant and breastfeeding women. So this is a big question mark of how we approach this with our patients. One of the other things that we're living with here in South Florida, which I think parallels the Zika growth, is that we have rising tides. Although our governor and our senator does not believe in climate change, this is at no rain on an evening in Miami on October 9th during the moon phase. And the streets are flooded because the water's rising and coming through the storm drains and flooding the streets. And the residual of that water stays in pools for a long time. And these are the favorite breeding grounds of mosquitoes and the mosquito that carries Zika. Oops. Am I able to go back? Yes. I can't forget Miami fashion. So these are some of the nettings that some people are wearing, and especially around the feet, because the mosquito actually stays low to the ground, does not fly high. Humans are its favorite source. And so there are many fashion statements coming from that. We are using aerial spraying as our major source in Miami, and that has been very controversial. Is it an effective tool for mosquitoes? If you look at Puerto Rico, if you look at the European Union, many have said that this is ineffective. And at the same time, we've been having multiple sprayings, and often without public notice. So there are people, early morning joggers, for example, who go out at dawn, which is when the spraying has occurred. So there's a lot of concern about that. And the spray that they've been using is Naled. I'm sure most people know about that by now. It's an organophosphate in the pesticide family, and it in itself has detrimental effects on neurological function and on the brains of the unborn or in utero. So that when we're exposed, this young woman, as in the case study, when she's exposed to the pesticides, there's always the possibility that that will affect the growing fetus. And so there are other sprays. This is what's going on in gardens that the county is using, larvicides. Their pellets or granules or sprays. They usually are used around pools and collected water, gutters, and standing water, which is what we have a lot of. And then there's the genetically modified mosquitoes, and if anyone saw the headline on in the Miami Herald the day before yesterday, GMO mosquitoes are being considered now in Miami Beach as another source of killing the Zika larva. Now, the thing is it's considered a mosquito birth control. We don't yet know what that means if we are bitten and infected by a mosquito carrying it. These are just questions. This is just to raise the question as practitioners and providers, how do we begin to become informed and how to share with our practitioner community the challenges and the benefits of these treatments. One of the things that happens with the aerial spraying, and I think it's really important, and with the larvicides, is that it's also killing off the natural predators, the wasps and other insects that are natural biological determinants of keeping the Zika virus at bay. And then, again, the mosquitoes present one risk and the pesticides present another. We know about the dose of exposure, the timing, the combinations. And so when we say that something is safe, how do we as practitioners do an environmental assessment to really know what else the people that we're working with have been exposed to? And that's a really big piece. And do we know, these are questions, is it safe to use insecticides during pregnancy? The CDC says it is safe, and yet there are reports in OBGYN journals and looking at what happens with exposure. So the good news is there are repellents and other things that could be used, and I think it's important to leave with a thought that rather than spraying DEET on a child every day when they go to school, maybe there is another repellent that's safe and herbal and can be used. And we have to weigh the benefit and the risk. And as David Perlmutter said, I think that we need to take a step back and recognize that we should always look at these interventions in terms of risk versus benefit. And what are they? And that's a question that we need to also ask our patients and our clients for them to determine what they feel is most effective. There are many people that are not using anything and they run the risk of being exposed to Zika. On the other hand, there are people that are bathing themselves in pesticides every day. So how do we as clinicians begin to ask the questions and determine with that person and create a treatment plan? So our concerns as practitioners is to know, how do we do an environmental assessment? I wonder how many of you here and in the audience out there do environmental assessments to really understand the synergy of many chemicals at one time that the person might be exposed to. And how do we begin to create community here so we could really have the information that we need to make more informed decisions with our clients. Body burden study that was done with the Environmental Working Group in the American Red Cross several years ago said that newborns are born with over 200 chemicals in their umbilical cord and in their own exposures. So, and that's through the mom. So we know that we're already overburdened when we come into this world. And these are some studies that have really looked at the neurotoxicity of pesticides. So on one hand, we want to protect ourselves, and on the other hand, are we exposing ourselves to a higher risk of ADD in children or early Alzheimer's in adults? We don't know, but they're questions that as clinicians we need to be asking. This is from Lancet Neurology. Dr. Landrigan is the head of environmental health as a pediatrician at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York, and he himself has written and expressed deep concerns about the neurological and neurobehavioral components of exposures to a variety of chemicals in childhood and in utero. This is, again, to bring it home, this is Miami, that there was a very big movement to stop the use of Naled, and the city listened, and it was citizens, and it was practitioners and politicians that came together and met for a series of meetings and even confronted the county's guidelines and recommendations to try to find a healthier way to stop the use of the Naled spraying. It's still in process what the next, when the spraying will continue, perhaps next season, next mosquito season, but there really have been there's been a lot of dialogue, and I think it's a model of community action and community coming together. And again, Miami Beach is at the epicenter of this. So to end, I just wanted to say that there are chemical and plant-based repellents. There are several journal articles comparing some of the DEET and other pesticides, insecticides to essential oils and other herbs, and it's really worth exploring. They're safe, they're eco-friendly, and they've been tested in several studies that have shown, for example, the number one Litsea has been identified as the most effective. Here's an article that talks about it. This is what it looks like. And it's a shrub that comes from China, Indonesia, and Taiwan, and it's been used for millennia as a way of protecting people from other infectious diseases. And so the question is, are essential oils effective? And here's another study two studies that looked at the behavior, the response of the mosquito to the essential oils. And mosquitoes are very sensitive to smell. They love perfume, so if you're wearing perfume, it's more likely that they will be attracted to that person. If they're wearing an essential oil, it's a repellent, and they will not be as ready to sting. So this just is the ending to say that DEET and DEPA have shown significant, have been just as effective, the essential oils, in being able to protect from being bitten by the mosquito. So we need to practice the precautionary principle as practitioners to really think about the do no harm and what is our best course of action working with clients and patients, and to evaluate the risks and benefits. We all need to start implementing environmental assessments, not just for these pesticides, but in general for all of the exposures that we have in our modern world, and to continue to be educated and to update with our patients so they're aware of any untoward side effects or the benefits of using some of them, and to collaborate with community and local government. We've talked about community, and I think this is another issue as a public health issue that can bring us all together to really think about the strategies and think about what some of you may be doing that might be effective in the protection of our patients and our families and ourselves. And we need to get involved in advocating for safer methods for controlling this as we move forward. Thank you.
All right. So thanks, guys. Let's bring on the chairs. We're going to have a panel discussion, so get your questions ready. If you've got a question, raise your hand. We'll have some questions in the house tonight. We also have a few that have been coming in on Twitter. So if we could bring back up Craig and Susan and JJ and Dr. Tel-Oren, we'll start the panel. All right, so come on up here. It's Miami Will Smith. You can just about hear it. All right. You got a mic there, Doc? You got a mic?
Right here.
Okay.
How are you?
You guys look very comfortable there with chairs. So maybe we could just, start with you, Susan. It's really interesting. Last year we focused on this new understanding from the OBGYN Society and the Endocrine Society for the first time coming out saying that there might be a problem with the number of chemicals and that they were being passed transgenerationally. We've heard that it takes 17 years for new science to make it into practice. Do you see that what you just shared is an example of that, of it's just no one's really still taking into account the toxic elements of some of the things they're spraying there?
Well, I would just say that we want to protect people, and it's with good intention, but because we have, just like with pharmaceuticals, we depend on chemicals for the answer. And what these chemicals are doing are really, they're endocrine disruptors, they're hormonal disruptors, they're neurotoxic, they're carcinogenic, and we have to think about it. And as functional medicine practitioners, what I would think is we also have to think about how do we help people to neutralize, detoxify, and if we are exposed, how do we then work to heal ourselves? And the last thing I just wanted to say that I didn't is that, I think I missed that slide, is that these are also neonicotinoids, which are, they kill the bees, basically, and the butterflies. They're anti-pollinators. And so we have another problem, which is that we're really, just ecologically speaking, we're creating another imbalance. And these pesticides, just like antibiotics in our microbiome, these pesticides are allowing the Zika virus to become resistant as time goes on. So what do we do after that when you don't have any more chemicals or antibiotics? I think we're looking at a very big issue that we don't know the answers, but we have to ask the questions.
Craig, a lot of these costs would qualify as negative externalities, in economics. How do we go about measuring these and putting them into the numbers, because they're so hard to quantify?
Well, I think the key is to try to frame the decisions right for decision makers. I think lots of times people get a lot of pressure to make the right decisions here and are not in a comfortable position. And I think that we can, as a community, sometimes, I think it's about not only giving the information, but it's actually putting it together in a story that they can understand, so that it can become a lot clearer. Because in my experience, oftentimes the policymakers don't really get the full picture, and it's sort of compressed to a couple of action points. How can we take action quickly and just get
and to
manage the front page story. Yeah,
absolutely. Dr. T, you're working in seeing patients all over the world, but a lot of people here in Florida as well. Are there certain things that you see in Florida patients, maybe not related to Zika, but maybe related to the sun or otherwise, that you think are unique to the population in Florida?
Of course, but I would be first inclined to tell people that the sun is our friend, for the most part, and we have a tendency to blame everything on the sun, everything under the sun. And, when dealing with the skin, it's always important to focus, first of all, on melanomas, because melanomas are killers, and I want to empower practitioners not to assume that just because somebody has a skin condition that appears dangerous, that they have to immediately think of the specialist that is dealing specifically only with skin. And the reason is, from our experience, is that when we send a patient to a practitioner that is a specialist, sometimes the treatment will be a lot more aggressive, invasive than is necessary, with outcomes that are not necessarily the best. We'll take into account the issue of melanoma. Recently, there was a study in the Journal of Dermatology that shows specifically that the parts of the skin that are most likely to develop into melanoma are not what we normally thought they were. A tiny dot, a tiny dark spot on your body, usually where the sun does not shine, usually where there was no significant sun exposure, is the one that is the most aggressive, the most invasive, has the deepest roots, and is most likely to become metastasized because it will reach the circulation much faster than the larger lesions that most practitioners are looking for. And in medical school, we learn about the A, B, C, D, E, right? Asymmetry, border, color, etc., diameter. And we assume that the larger lesions are the ones that are the highest risk. And the skin doctors are still doing that, are looking for the large lesions. When the study has shown conclusively that the tiniest lesions that appear out of nowhere, that you don't remember where they came from and when they started occurring, those tiny dark specks are the ones that are the fastest growing inwards and that are causing melanoma. Now, I don't have statistics about Florida being a greater state for melanoma than other states. Obviously, we will have more carcinoma, which is not so lethal, the basal cell, squamous cell carcinomas, which is a different issue, which I'd like to address some other time. But if you take something out of it clinically, I would like you to look at your patients and see if they have a dark, tiny spot that appeared out of nowhere, that is usually where the sun does not shine. And that's the one that should be eliminated. And if a person has 30 of them, we all know from 20 years ago that the number one risk factor for melanoma is multiple pigmented nevi. How do you eliminate multiple pigmented nevi? You cannot remove 100 by doing 100 surgeries. You need to use some type of a non-invasive method, a non-aggressive or surgical method to simply dry out those tiny lesions, eliminate them. It's fairly easy to do with certain acids, certain liquids, and then they slough off, and if there is no root, if there is no pigment remaining, there will never be a melanoma in that patient or in 1,000 patients that will undergo the same treatment. It's very simple, but it is not something that you are likely to hear from the typical specialist in the skin, who are still looking for the large lesions and are looking only for the one that they can do surgery on. Whereas the small, tiny ones, they still are ignoring because they don't know what to do with them. So it's maybe something that the functional approach, the preventative approach, should be looking at a little more closely.
Awesome. JJ, before I ever met you, a long time ago, I read an article. It was called The 8 Reasons Why You Can't Lose Weight, or something like that, 6 or 8. And I think one of them was toxicity in the environment. What chance for people to lose weight when they're literally spraying it from the air?
I know, I've been fascinated with weight loss resistance for 30 years, and I stumbled upon, like I was teaching this course for doctors, and I stumbled upon this information. I'm trying to remember who the researcher was on toxicity. And this is such a key problem. If you have this, it doesn't matter. And that's what I saw with diet is you could be eating perfectly, exercising, but if you have a toxicity issue, now you've got endocrine disruption, your metabolism is lowered, you're going to hold on to body fat, because the last thing your body wants to do when you've got all this toxicity stored in your body fat is to release toxins. And it also makes you think a step deeper in that whenever you're doing a weight loss program, you're doing a detoxification program. And you have to be very careful when you do that, because if you're losing body fat, you're freeing up toxins. So you have to make sure that you're supporting detox pathways as you're helping someone lose weight.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm not going to ask each of you who you're going to vote for, a bit controversial and going there, but I would ask you, just from your own unique perspectives that you've shared today, what you feel, and maybe I can start with you, Dr. T, and we can make our way down. What is the one thing that you think that the functional and integrative medicine community needs to do to take its rightful place at the forefront of medicine?
I would say 2 things. First, we need to embrace science in unequivocal terms. Because the medical profession, traditionally the allopathic profession, has tried to continue tradition, and they call themselves traditionalists for specific reason. They like tradition. Allopathic medicine is mostly tradition-based. And if we embrace science, we can claim it as our own. Functional medicine, natural medicine, preventive medicine, nutritional, holistic, that is science. Whoever is ignoring holistic principles is not going to be scientific, because science shows us the interconnectivity between body organs, systems, microbes, and so on. So you have to be holistic to be scientific, by definition. And if we embrace that and run with it, then science will be with us, and the allopathic profession will gradually have to move forward to be with us in order to stay with science. That's one thing. And the second thing is to look at children. Every adult that has a chronic disease started somewhere in the past as a child that was not appropriately taken care of by society. That child was getting treatment at a pediatrician's office, and the outcomes are not observed by the pediatrician, but by whom? But the doctor who sees that child as an adult later on with chronic illnesses. If we understand what makes children sick in our society, and our society has the sickest children of all societies on earth. If 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 5 children are on medical drugs, and so many children are diagnosed with all those diseases, from attention deficit to autoimmune disease, allergies, asthma, autism, and cancer now is becoming a big thing with children, there must be reasons that we have to investigate. And nobody is asking those questions, and then we get surprised when society is overburdened economically with all those sick adults that we cannot handle, because they don't take their share of the burden of society. They don't contribute as much because they're sick adults. And we have to ask those questions. Now, I'm fortunate that I have 20,000 children in Nepal in my organization. The orphanages and schools and child learning programs and mothers groups. We have 20,000 children in a network all over rural Nepal. And yes, they have problem with malnutrition because they don't have access. And yes, they can be injured and die because they have no immediate health care available to take care of the children's injury. But one thing I've noticed, and we've started doing some research and collecting data, in 20,000 children, not even one child is autistic. Not even one child has asthma and allergies. Not even one child has learning disorders. They don't know what those things are. They've never seen them in rural areas. And they are the control groups, if you will. Because there are no children in the West who are not exposed to the multitude of exposures that could be the root causes of all this sickness and illness that we see today. And to me, investigating those causes so that we can keep our children healthy, so that they will become healthy adults without chronic diseases, that will be a huge advancement forward for functional medicine.
Absolutely. Yeah, here. So Susan, same question for you for that. What do you think is the number one thing that our community as practitioners needs to do to take its rightful place in the future of medicine?
Well, I think that the whole field of functional medicine dovetails with lifestyle approaches to health and well-being. And so we have to look at everything that's creating the chronic diseases that we have today. And a big piece, and I think we've touched on it, and is the environmental component, that probably 90% of all cancers are triggered by environmental causes. And so if we start to address, and I think for practitioners, besides practicing, we also need to get involved, and we need to advocate for healthier environments and organize in our communities and be part of the solution. I think that we really hold an important place in being able to do that. And I'll just say, as a nurse, You know, with 17 million nurses in the world globally and 3.4 million in this country, in communities everywhere, that if one professional segment really was able to have an impact, that would be a good place to begin.
Beautifully said. Let's get every nurse watching the Functional Forum. That's a good start. We'll talk about how to do that. Craig, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I think it's about actively seeking partnerships and collaborations with other stakeholders, even ones that might not come to mind in the beginning. You know, I think, for example, sometimes the insurance companies are thought of as the enemy, but their employers are interested. You know, governments are interested. I think communities are interested in a different approach, and so. And I think it's a lot easier than ever to collaborate actively with different partners. We can't go it alone. And I think that to really get the change that we want to happen, we have to look within ourselves, but then out to other partners and figure out practical ways to just start.
Absolutely. JJ, final thought from you?
I'm going to throw it out to marketing. So here's the world as I see it. We all get together, we collaborate. Even if we don't have the same opinions, we don't put each other down out there to the world. We get together, we put our ideas out there. Social media and internet is the great equalizer. We all put our ideas out there and we all share each other's ideas and tag each other, and we can take over that way. So through collaboration, sharing of ideas, and marketing, we've got this one.
Absolutely. Look, this has been an amazing panel. Thank you so much for sticking with it. I know that it's been a long evening. Thank you so much to all the Functional Forum meetup groups. Go to meetup.functionalforum.com. Next month, it's a good opportunity for everyone to do their Future of Functional in 5 talk. You can see all of them there online. Our next Functional Forum is on the 5th of December. We're going to do a recap. We're going to have Dr. Dean Ornish, Dallas Hartwig, and Charles Eisenstein, some of the best content that we've done from 2016 as a recap. And then in January, we're going to start going after to not just speak to build the to speak to the choir, but to build the church. That's what's happening in 2017. A big warm welcome and thank you to everyone who's been here tonight, and we'll see you next time.